A black SUV exploded less than 10 seconds after she walked away from it. The strange part wasn't the explosion. It was the man standing across the street. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He simply watched to make sure she was still alive. Before disappearing into the night, she believed it was a random accident. It wasn't. For 3 years, someone had erased every danger before it could reach her. Every stalker, every robbery, every coincidence. She never noticed. Because the man protecting her wasn't a police officer. He wasn't family. He wasn't even supposed to have a heart. He was the city's most feared mafia boss, and she didn't even know his name. The security camera never recorded the man who saved her life. Frame by frame, investigators watched the footage again and again. A crowded sidewalk. People rushing home after work. A young woman smiling politely as she carried 2 grocery bags. Then, somehow, she changed direction. No phone call. No one speaking to her. No reason at all. She stepped away from the black SUV parked beside the curb. 9 seconds later, the vehicle exploded. The blast shattered every window within 50 feet. Metal flew through the air like bullets. People screamed. Smoke swallowed the entire street. But the woman everyone thought should have died was already safely across the road. Police called it luck. Witnesses called it a miracle. Neither answer was true. Because across the street stood a man dressed in a perfectly tailored black coat. He never flinched. His eyes never left the young woman. Only after he saw paramedics surrounding her did he quietly turn around and disappear into the darkness. No cameras followed him. No witnesses remembered his face. It was almost as if he had never existed. But he did. And that explosion was only one page in a story she would never believe. Her name was Elena, 26 years old, a kindergarten teacher. She lived in a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and an old coffee maker that only worked if she kicked it twice. She spent weekends helping elderly neighbors carry groceries. Half of every paycheck disappeared into hospital bills for the grandmother who had raised her. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't connected to criminals. She was simply kind. The kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. The kind of woman who still believed good people eventually found happiness. What Elena never knew was that kindness had made her the center of a war she couldn't even see. Because in the shadows of the city, someone had been watching her every single day. Not with obsession, not with control, but with absolute determination that she would survive. His name was Adrian Volkov. The newspapers called him a businessman. Politicians called him a necessary evil. Rival gangs called him death itself. For nearly 15 years, Adrian ruled the city's underground empire with ruthless precision. One order from him could bankrupt companies or make people disappear before sunrise. Men twice his age lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Enemies feared the sound of his silence more than the sound of gunfire. Yet every evening, no matter how many meetings, betrayals, or blood-soaked negotiations filled his day, someone delivered a single report to his desk. Not about money, not about weapons, not about rivals. About Elena. She bought flowers for her grandmother. She walked home safely. She smiled at one of her students. She skipped lunch again. Every detail. Every day. Why would the most feared man in the city care whether a kindergarten teacher remembered to eat? That answer begins 22 years earlier. With a rainy night, a frightened little boy, and one act of kindness that should have been forgotten forever. Except Adrian never forgot. And now, someone else had finally discovered his secret. Someone powerful enough to turn Elena into the perfect weapon against the only man who had ever loved anyone. The explosion wasn't meant to kill her. It was a warning, a message to Adrian. One that said, "We know exactly who she is." And from that moment forward, protecting Elena would no longer be enough. Soon, she would have to learn the terrifying truth herself. Adrian Volkov had built his empire on one simple rule. Never have a weakness. Weakness got people killed. Weakness gave enemies leverage. Weakness destroyed kings. For 15 years, he obeyed that rule without exception. Until Elena. The story began long before she could remember it. 22 years earlier, Adrian wasn't feared by anyone. He was just an 11-year-old boy, running through freezing rain, with blood on his shirt and fear in his eyes. His father, one of the city's most ruthless crime bosses, had been murdered that night. The people responsible wanted to erase every remaining member of the Volkov family, including the frightened child now stumbling through dark alleys. He had gone nearly 2 days without food. His small hands shook from exhaustion. Every passing car made him hide. Every stranger looked like another assassin. Then he collapsed outside a modest neighborhood bakery. The lights were already off. The owner had closed for the evening. But someone noticed him. A little girl, no older than 4, standing beside her grandmother. She tugged gently on the older woman's sleeve and pointed toward the soaked boy lying on the pavement. While everyone else crossed the street to avoid trouble, they walked toward it. The grandmother wrapped Adrian in her own coat. The little girl held out the only thing she had, a warm piece of bread she had been saving for herself. She smiled without asking his name, without asking where he came from, without asking why there was blood on his clothes. She simply believed that a hungry child deserved kindness. For 1 hour, inside that tiny apartment above the bakery, Adrian experienced something he had never known. Safety. The grandmother cleaned his wounds. The little girl kept talking about school, flowers, and birds outside the window, filling the silence with innocent laughter. Before dawn, loyal members of the Volkov family found him. They took him away before the killers could trace his location. He never saw the grandmother or the little girl again. But he never forgot either. Most people remember the faces of those who hurt them. Adrian remembered the faces of those who didn't. Years passed. The frightened boy disappeared. In his place rose a man who conquered the city's criminal underworld, one brutal decision at a time. Every betrayal was answered, every rival removed, every threat eliminated before it could grow. People feared him because they believed he had no soul left. They were wrong. He had simply hidden the last piece of it. Years later, while reviewing old property records during a redevelopment project, Adrian recognized a familiar address. The bakery. Curiosity led him to investigate. The bakery was gone. The grandmother was struggling with mounting medical bills. And the little girl had become Elena. She had no idea that the terrified boy she once fed had become one of the most powerful men in the country. Adrian intended to keep it that way. At first, he only made anonymous donations to cover hospital expenses. When Elena's apartment building nearly doubled her rent, the owner unexpectedly changed his mind overnight. When the kindergarten where she worked faced closure, a mysterious investor quietly purchased the property and kept every teacher employed. When thieves targeted her neighborhood, police somehow increased patrols without explanation. Every problem disappeared before Elena ever realized there had been one. She thought life occasionally rewarded good people. She never imagined those rewards had a name. Then everything changed. Inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, Adrian's most trusted advisor placed a folder on the conference table. The Blackthorn Syndicate has arrived. The room fell silent. Even veteran captains exchanged uneasy glances. Blackthorn wasn't just another criminal organization. They specialized in destroying powerful empires from the inside. Not through wars, through secrets, through families, through the people their enemies loved most. Adrian slowly opened the folder. The first photograph made his expression harden. It was Elena, walking home from work, completely unaware she had been photographed from less than 20 feet away. The second image showed her grandmother leaving the hospital. The third showed the explosion from earlier that evening. Attached to the final page was a handwritten note. "We found your weakness." For the first time in years, Adrian felt genuine fear. Not for himself, for her. He immediately ordered every available guard to watch Elena from a distance. No uniforms, no visible protection, no mistakes. She could never know. If Elena discovered she was connected to Adrian Volkov, she wouldn't just lose her peaceful life. She would become the biggest target in the city. Meanwhile, Elena tried to convince herself the explosion had simply been an accident. But strange things kept happening. A delivery truck sped toward a crosswalk before suddenly swerving away at the last second. A man followed her for 3 blocks before mysteriously disappearing. One evening, she returned home to find her apartment doors slightly open. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing looked disturbed, except for one detail. The old photograph of her grandmother holding her as a child had been moved from the living room shelf to the kitchen table. She was certain she hadn't left it there. Someone had entered her home. Someone had looked at that picture. Someone wanted her to know they had been inside. That night, for the first time in years, Elena slept with the lights on. Across the city, Adrian watched live security feeds from a private control room. Dozens of screens displayed different angles of Elena's apartment building. His men rotated shifts every 4 hours. No one approached without being identified. No vehicle remained parked too long. No unfamiliar face escaped notice. Then, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, one screen went black, then another, then another. Within seconds, every camera surrounding Elena's building shut down simultaneously. The room erupted into chaos. It's a signal jammer. They're moving. Adrian didn't wait for another word. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. For years, he had protected Elena from the shadows. Tonight, the shadows were coming for her. By the time Adrian's convoy reached Elena's apartment building, the entire neighborhood had gone dark. Streetlights were dead. Traffic signals blinked uselessly. The only sounds were distant sirens and the pounding rain. His men spread across the block with military precision. Every entrance, every rooftop, every alley. They found nothing. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. No attackers. It was almost too quiet. Adrian stepped out of the armored SUV and looked toward Elena's apartment window. A single candle flickered inside. She was still there, alive, but something felt wrong. Years in the criminal underworld had taught him one lesson above all others. The most dangerous enemies didn't attack where you expected. They waited until you believed the danger had passed. Inside her apartment, Elena sat on the floor beside her grandmother, trying to calm her racing heart. The power outage had frightened the elderly woman, so Elena lit every candle she could find. She kept telling herself everything would be fine. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Not with hatred, with purpose. She walked to the window and slowly pulled the curtain aside. Across the street, several black vehicles were parked beneath the rain. Men in dark suits stood silently around them. They weren't police. They weren't neighbors. And in the center stood one man whose face she couldn't quite make out. Even from a distance, he carried himself with complete control. Everyone around him seemed to wait for his approval before moving. For a brief second, their eyes met. Then he turned away. Within minutes, every vehicle disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. Elena stared into the empty street. Who were they? And why had she suddenly felt safer? The next morning, Adrian ordered an emergency meeting. Only his most trusted captains were allowed inside. The doors locked. Phones were surrendered. No one spoke until Adrian placed the anonymous note on the table. "We found your weakness." Silence filled the room. Every man understood what those words meant. Someone had breached the impossible. Someone had discovered the only person Adrian had spent years protecting. The information came from inside, Adrian said quietly. No outsider could have tracked her without help. No one argued, because they all knew he was right. There was a traitor sitting somewhere within his own organization. Someone who had watched Elena for months, while pretending to serve Adrian. The hunt for the traitor began immediately. Meanwhile, Elena's peaceful routine slowly unraveled. She started noticing impossible coincidences. Every morning, the same elderly florist smiled and handed her a single white lily, insisting someone had already paid for it. Whenever she stayed late at work, a taxi somehow appeared within seconds, even on rainy nights when none were available. Her grandmother's expensive medication suddenly became fully covered by an anonymous charity. Even the broken elevator in her apartment building, ignored for years, was repaired overnight. At first, she accepted these moments as good fortune. But eventually, good fortune became impossible to ignore. Someone was helping her. Someone with unlimited resources. Someone she had never met. Or so she believed. 3 days later, Elena attended one of her students' birthday parties at a local park. Children laughed. Parents talked. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Until a little boy's balloon floated toward the busy road. Without thinking, Elena ran after it. A speeding truck rounded the corner. Too fast. Far too fast. Witnesses later argued about what happened next. Some claimed the truck swerved. Others insisted another vehicle struck it first. Security cameras captured only a blur. But one fact never changed. A black luxury sedan slammed into the truck, forcing it away from Elena seconds before impact. The sedan spun across the pavement. Its front end crumpled against a concrete barrier. The driver stepped out before anyone could reach him. Tall, calm, his dark suit stained with blood from a cut across his forehead. For the first time, Elena saw his face clearly. He looked at her only long enough to confirm she wasn't hurt. Then he walked away. No anger, no heroics, no desire for thanks. just quiet certainty that she was alive. Before she could stop him, dozens of men surrounded him. Within moments, they disappeared into waiting vehicles, leaving behind only shattered glass and questions. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She replayed the moment over and over. Why would a complete stranger destroy a luxury car to save someone he'd never met? The answer arrived sooner than expected. The following afternoon, Elena discovered an old envelope hidden among her grandmother's belongings. Inside was a faded photograph, a tiny apartment, an elderly woman, a frightened young boy wrapped in an oversized coat, and a 4-year-old Elena proudly handing him a piece of bread. On the back, written in delicate handwriting, were only 8 words. Kindness always finds its way back home. Confused, Elena asked her grandmother about the picture. The elderly woman smiled sadly. I wondered when you'd find that. She explained how, many years earlier, they had helped an injured child during a terrible storm. He had vanished before sunrise. They never learned his name. But I've always believed he survived, her grandmother whispered. There was something determined about his eyes. Elena stared at the photograph. The boy's face was older than her memory, but strangely familiar. Where had she seen those eyes before? Then it struck her. The man who had stepped out of the wrecked black sedan. The same cold eyes. The same quiet expression. Impossible. The child from the photograph couldn't be him. Could it? Across the city, Adrian finally uncovered the betrayal. One of his oldest captains had secretly sold information to the Blackthorn Syndicate. For nearly a year, money had bought his loyalty. But greed wasn't the worst part. He had personally leaked Elena's name, her address, her daily routine, everything. The captain was captured before dawn and brought to an abandoned warehouse. No one heard shouting. No one heard gunshots. Only Adrian's voice broke the silence. You didn't betray my empire. A pause. You betrayed the only innocent person who ever showed me mercy. Hours later, every criminal organization in the city received the same message. The traitor had disappeared. No explanation. No body. No warning. Just a reminder that Adrian Volkov never forgave betrayal. But even removing the traitor changed nothing. Because Blackthorn had already achieved its goal. They no longer needed information. They needed Elena herself. And while Adrian believed he still had time to prepare, his enemies were already inside the hospital where Elena's grandmother was recovering, disguised as doctors, waiting patiently for Elena to walk through the door. She had no idea that by sunset, her ordinary life would end forever. Elena arrived at the hospital carrying a small paper bag filled with homemade soup. It was still warm. Her grandmother always smiled whenever Elena cooked. Even if the recipes weren't perfect, that simple thought made Elena smile as she stepped through the main entrance. She never noticed the man at the reception desk quietly touching an earpiece. She's here. The message traveled through the building in seconds. 2 men dressed as hospital staff left the 3rd floor. Another entered the stairwell. A woman in a nurse's uniform locked a side exit. Patients continued walking through the halls. Doctors continued their rounds. No one realized a carefully planned kidnapping had already begun. 3 blocks away, Adrian's phone vibrated. One sentence appeared on the encrypted screen. Movement confirmed. Hospital. His heart stopped. Get the cars. Within seconds, engines roared to life. Every traffic law became meaningless. Adrian's convoy tore through the city. For the first time in years, he was late. Elena reached her grandmother's room and immediately sensed something was wrong. The bed was empty. The heart monitor had been disconnected. The flowers she had brought yesterday were lying on the floor. A nurse she had never seen before smiled politely. Your grandmother was taken for additional tests. Something about the woman's voice felt rehearsed. Elena frowned. My grandmother can't walk without assistance. The nurse hesitated. Just for a moment. It was enough. Elena slowly stepped backward. The nurse reached into her pocket. Not for a medical instrument. For a syringe. Elena turned and ran. The hallway exploded into chaos. 2 disguised men rushed toward her from opposite directions. She sprinted through frightened visitors, knocking over a cart filled with medical supplies. Metal trays crashed across the floor. People screamed. The fake nurse shouted for security. But she wasn't calling security. She was calling her partners. Elena reached the stairwell and slammed the heavy door behind her. Her breathing became frantic. Her hands trembled as she raced downward. The footsteps behind her grew louder. They were gaining on her. She burst into the underground parking garage. Rows of parked cars stretched into the darkness. There was nowhere to hide. A black van screeched to a stop in front of her. Its side door slid open. Masked men stepped out. She turned to run. Another vehicle crashed through the garage entrance. An armored black SUV smashed into the kidnapper's van with a deafening impact. The collision echoed through the concrete structure. Doors flew open. Men in black suits poured out with incredible speed. Precise, disciplined, professional. Within seconds, the kidnappers realized they had attacked the wrong woman. Because someone else had arrived first. Adrian stepped out of the SUV. His expression was colder than Elena had ever imagined possible. He walked toward her without taking his eyes off the attackers. One man raised a weapon. Before he could fire, Adrian's bodyguards intercepted him. Another tried to escape. He never reached the exit. The battle lasted less than a minute. Then, silence. Smoke drifted through the garage. Elena stood frozen. The mysterious stranger who had appeared again and again was standing only a few feet away. He looked directly into her eyes. Not like a mafia boss. Not like a criminal. Like a man terrified of losing someone. "You need to come with me," he said quietly. She took one step backward. "Who are you?" For years, Adrian had rehearsed this moment in his mind. He imagined hundreds of different answers. But only one mattered. "I'm the reason they're hunting you." The words hit harder than the explosions. Harder than the chase. Harder than everything she had experienced. Before she could respond, more gunfire echoed through the garage. Blackthorn's reinforcements had arrived. Bullets shattered concrete pillars. Glass exploded around them. Adrian instinctively pulled Elena behind the armored SUV, shielding her with his own body. She looked at him in disbelief. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting her, exactly as he always had. The convoy escaped the hospital and raced toward an abandoned estate on the edge of the city. It had once belonged to Adrian's family. Now it served as the safest place he controlled. Only after every entrance was secured did Elena finally demand answers. No more secrets. Her voice cracked. "I deserve the truth." Adrian remained silent for several moments. Then he placed an old photograph on the table. The same faded picture Elena had found at home. Only this copy was preserved inside a leather wallet. Its edges were worn from years of being carried everywhere. "I've kept this with me for 22 years. Elena stared at him. "You were the boy." His voice was almost a whisper. "The hungry boy your grandmother rescued." Everything stopped. Every impossible coincidence. Every mysterious rescue. Every anonymous gift. Every near escape. Every unanswered question. Suddenly, they all made sense. "I never forgot either of you," Adrian continued. "Everyone else saw the son of a murderer. You saw a frightened child. I promised myself that if I ever became powerful enough, nothing bad would ever happen to your family again." Elena felt tears filling her eyes. "You've been protecting me." He nodded. "Every single day." She remembered the repaired elevator, the hospital bills, the flowers, the explosions, the black sedan, the man across the street. He had always been there, always watching, always making sure she reached tomorrow. "You gave away your entire life?" she whispered. "Why?" Adrian looked away. "Because kindness deserves to survive." For the first time in decades, the most feared man in the city allowed someone to see the loneliness behind his reputation. He hadn't protected Elena because he expected love, or gratitude, or forgiveness. He had protected her because one small act of compassion had saved an abandoned child from believing the entire world was cruel. Their reunion didn't last long. A trusted guard burst into the room. "They found us." Blackthorn had surrounded the estate. Dozens of armed vehicles blocked every road. There would be no escape. Their leader stepped into the courtyard with a loudspeaker. "You built your empire by making everyone fear you. But today, you'll watch the only person you ever loved die." Adrian closed his eyes. For years he had sacrificed everything to keep Elena away from his world. Now that world had finally reached her. He made a decision. One no one expected. He walked outside alone. His own men tried to stop him. He refused. If Blackthorn wanted him, they would have him, not her. He laid his weapon on the ground. The enemy smiled. It looked like surrender. It wasn't. While every eye remained fixed on Adrian, his loyal captains executed the plan he had prepared years earlier for the day his enemies discovered Elena. Hidden escape tunnels opened beneath the estate. His bodyguards led Elena and her grandmother towards safety. She resisted. She fought. She screamed his name. But Adrian never looked back. Then everything changed. Police sirens filled the valley. Helicopters appeared overhead. For months, Adrian had secretly provided evidence against Blackthorn to international investigators. He had delayed acting on it for one reason. He needed proof strong enough to destroy the syndicate forever. Today, every Blackthorn leader had gathered in one place. Exactly where Adrian wanted them. The estate became a battlefield, not between rival mafias, between criminals and justice. By sunrise, Blackthorn no longer existed. Its leaders were arrested. Its empire collapsed. Its reign ended forever. Several months later, the newspapers reported that Adrian Volkov had disappeared. Some believed he had fled the country. Others claimed he had died. No one knew the truth. Elena visited the old bakery that had long since closed. The building was scheduled for demolition. She stood quietly in front of the faded doorway. Then she noticed a familiar black envelope resting on the windowsill. Inside was only one photograph, a recent one. Elena laughing with her grandmother in a park, taken from a distance.